ceasefire collapses as several missiles are fired from Gaza, leading the Israeli Air Force to bomb targets in the Strip and Prime Minister Netanyahu to recall Israeli negotiators from Cairo. Iraqi government forces launch an operation to retake Tikrit from Islamic State militants a day after the Mosul Dam is recaptured by Kurdish fighters. And protesters and police clash overnight in Ferguson, Missouri, as tensions sparked by the police killing of an unarmed African-American teenager enter their 10th day.
The News Today with David Matlin.
Hello and welcome to the program here. The ceasefire in Gaza collapsed this afternoon after militants in the Strip fired several rockets at Israel, prompting the Israeli Air Force to bomb targets in the enclave. Well, Israeli officials who were in Cairo trying to negotiate a permanent, durable ceasefire were called home by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and at this point, it's still unclear what the future holds for the Gaza crisis. No militant group has taken responsibility for firing the rockets today, but Israel blames Hamas. It's reported that thousands of Palestinians in Gaza have left their homes now for shelter at UN facilities as they fear a return to hostilities. Now let's see a summary of the events of the last 24 hours, day 43 of Operation Protective Edge.
وافقنا على التمديد ليوم واحد فقط.
لم نتفق حتى اللحظة على أي بند بشكل نهائي.
We hope they can reach an agreement today and move to a sustainable ceasefire.
לא מספיק שיהיה רק כוח, יש לנו הרבה כוח. צריך גם הרבה אורך רוח.
The hopes of the people in Gaza for a better future and the hopes of the people in Israel for sustainable security rest on those talks.
Now with me in studio to make sense of the latest developments are Danny Ayalon, senior I-24 News analyst and Israel's former deputy foreign minister, and Yoav Limor, military analyst for Israel Hayom Daily. Thank you both for joining us here tonight. Yoav, I have to start with you. Let's focus on the military situation right now. Many people, especially in the last days, have been saying, well, there's no appetite left for conflict on either side of this. But what's the status now of the IDF, and how realistic do you think it is that we may return to
Let's start with the latest, David. There is a report coming out from Cairo 5 minutes ago that the Palestinian delegation asked to renew the ceasefire as from midnight tonight. We have to wait and see what does it mean after what we've seen this afternoon. But if this report is true, and we've seen dozens of false reports in the past 24 hours, but if it's true and it goes down back to Israel, Israel will say, as always, if there is no fire from Gaza, we will keep on talking. As long as there is fire from Gaza, we refrain from talking. That has been the Israeli agenda since day one of Operation Protective Edge. Now, let's analyze what's going on in Cairo. It seemed that the sides are getting closer to understandings, not an agreement. The way to an agreement is still far. Palestinians still demands the seaport. Israel is against it. Israel wants the Gaza Strip to be left from militants and explosive, etc., etc. The Palestinians won't play that game alongside that Israeli deal. So the sides are still far away from each other, but there were talkings in the past 24 hours that the Egyptians will reach understandings from both sides that will enable them to announce a permanent ceasefire, and then the sides will keep on talking until they reach an agreement. Apparently, it collapsed this afternoon. Why? I believe both sides, as you said, don't want to fight, but each one is trying to play a chicken game, like we played in the neighborhood. We look at you, we say, okay, you will be afraid first. They look at us, they play the same game. Hamas didn't fire the rockets to Beersheba, but a group that fired the rockets this afternoon used Hamas's infrastructure in Gaza, which means Hamas allowed the shooting and maybe even pushed that organization to do so. Why is Hamas into fighting? I believe that goes down to the gentleman that stands or sits next to Dani Ayalon. Khaled Mashal in Qatar still wants to drive away the Egyptian route and bring back the Qatari route. He's down into it. He's trying to get his delegation to be as hostile as possible. It works for him for the past 2 weeks. We have to wait and see what these evenings brings to both sides.
What about these airstrikes today by the Israeli Air Force? How significant were they?
Israel retaliated. That's how we should look at it. Israel is retaliating, but not breaking the rules or breaking the game. Israel wants to go back to the negotiating table and get out with an agreement. As you said, I don't see any appetite in Jerusalem or in Gaza or in Cairo, maybe in Qatar, but on both sides of the front, I can't see any appetite to keep on fighting. So the delegation comes back, but we might see it going back to Cairo tomorrow.
Let's speak about those negotiations a little bit now. For example, today the Prime Minister openly stating that he's withdrawing the team from the negotiating table. Does that mean the end of talks, or is that posturing in the situation?
Not at all. It's mostly posturing. As we near the deadline, there is a lot of brinkmanship, there is a lot of push and pull. So I wouldn't take these things as final yet. The fact that Hamas was allowing this fire, and whether it was Hamas itself or any other of the rogue organizations, it doesn't matter. Israel sees Hamas as responsible, and hence the retaliation and the response. But I would say right now, Hamas is playing a very dangerous game for their own interests. Either they're trying to bet the entire house, which they may lose it as well, or they are trying to get a better understanding. Mashal here, in Qatar, I think is the guy who doesn't care. He is raising the stakes all the time because he doesn't have anything to lose.
There's nothing to lose, right?
Exactly.
This position there.
It's the people of Gaza. It's the leadership in Gaza, which is much more, I would say, responsible in a way, or more moderate in their negotiation tactics. But Mashal is a big force, and right now, I think the Palestinians, the Egyptians are trying to funnel all the pressure on him. Whether this will suffice or not, we will soon know. But I believe that Israel, if we will see a breakdown of negotiations, it will pull all stops, and I think it will go all the way actually to bring about Hamas demise.
We'll
and
definitely come back to that topic in a minute.
There are calls from Israeli cabinet ministers led by Naftali Bennett to call off the talks and go into Gaza and take Hamas out of the game.
Not so surprising, but certainly we'll come back to talk about the potential scenarios that may play out here in a moment. But before we discuss that, our correspondent Shai Ben-Ari takes a look at the current picture.
A reminder of just how fragile the situation remains between Israel and Hamas arrived Tuesday afternoon when a number of rockets were launched from Gaza towards southern Israel, thus disrupting the latest ceasefire. Among the locations hit by rockets were open areas near Beersheba, with another landing in the vicinity of Netivot. Fortunately, no damage and no injuries were sustained. An IDF response was quick to follow, with airstrikes hitting the Gaza neighborhood of Zaytun, as well as the El Marazi refugee camp and agricultural zones near Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip. No organization has so far claimed responsibility for the rocket fire, but it appears likely that one of the more radical factions within the Strip may have taken the opportunity to escalate the situation, perhaps even against the will of the Hamas political leadership. These developments followed the announcement late Monday of a 24-hour extension to the previous 5-day ceasefire, with only minutes remaining on the clock.
We have agreed to an extension for 1 day only. 1 day only. Tomorrow we will either agree or we disagree.
Despite rumors emerging Monday evening of an impending agreement that would resolve the conflict which has raged for over a month between Israel and Hamas, it is clear that significant gaps still exist, with the latest hostilities further complicating issues. If, despite the violence, an agreement is signed Tuesday, it would likely include an extended ceasefire, this one indefinite, while also delaying a resolution of the core issues to a later negotiation stage, a common formula in Middle East peacemaking. Hamas representatives insisted Tuesday's 24-hour ceasefire would be the final extension, though this has been claimed with previous ceasefires. In any case, an announcement of failure or success is expected towards midnight local time.
Now, back in the studio here, Yoav, again, we're just getting into this concept of what options are on the table here. Militarily, what can you see the IDF doing in the event that this collapses and that rocket fire resumes?
Beforehand, when we were a month and a half ago when we started that operation, we're at day 43. It's an unimaginable number, 43 days. Just to compare, the Lebanon war, the second Lebanon war, took 35 days, and that's Gaza, that's not Lebanon. At the beginning, the army went for a small-scale operation. Now it goes back to the cabinet. The army will be, in a way, a waiter. It will come with the menu to the cabinet minister and tell them, okay, there is this possibility, and this possibility. That's the price, and that's the price. Choose, and we will serve you the meal. I mean, it might be a very limited meal of airstrikes. Israel can go with those airstrikes forever. I mean, Israel is much stronger than Hamas, and it's only down to logic that Hamas, every time it shoots from Gaza, it loses some of its ability, whereas Israel remains strong. But Israel doesn't want to play that game for a long time. Israel wants the people, the civilians at the south of Israel, to go back to schools in 2 weeks, to work, etc., etc. So Israel can't allow itself to remain in that situation, which means, in my eyes, Israel will go to either of two options, either to a much larger scale operation using ground forces into Gaza in order to push Hamas to go back to Cairo and to beg for an agreement, or at least to agree for an agreement, a better agreement for Israel, a worse agreement for Hamas, or if the cabinet calls, all hell breaks loose, and then sends the army to take over Gaza. I can't see it happening today, mainly because of the international arena. Remember what Washington says about Israel, what Europe says about Israel, what the UN says about Israel. So Israel can say we're the only ones who take care of our own national interests, but still Israel has to think what the world thinks of us. We are not ISIS in Iraq, and we are not Assad in Syria. We're a modern Western state, and we deal with modern Western states.
Speaking of the international arena now, Denny alone here, how significant is that in this current stage that we're in this conflict, that international pressure?
Well, it is quite significant. It is growing. But this is of less significance than the relations with Washington, and especially at the top, because we can go on with international pressure forever, except Washington, because Washington is our political umbrella. This is our political iron dome, if you will, because without the American veto in the Security Council, we could have been dragged into sanctions and really measures which would be very harsh. So everything will have to be thinking about what would President Obama do, or how much will he allow us to do it. This is the first consideration. The second one is not Europe, is Egypt, is Mr. Sisi. Because if Sisi can tolerate an operation there without raising the sentiments in Cairo streets against him, then we can go. I believe that Israel will take will heed to and consult with Sisi. The Hamas has not been able actually to raise up sentiments, not with the Israeli Arabs, not even with the Arabs, with the Palestinians in the West Bank, not much in Cairo. But this would be something of consideration as far as international pressure. The United States and Egypt. All the rest is insignificant. UN or Europe or Russia.
Another question about the negotiations right now. Since the beginning, we mentioned this earlier, that this equation for quiet has been put out there by the Israeli Prime Minister from the beginning of this scenario. Do you think that, in other words, showing Israel's cards in a way in terms of what the country's really interested in, returning to a quiet situation, has weakened Israel's position in some way in these talks?
I'm not sure. I think what has weakened Israel's position from the start was that they realized, the Hamas, that there was no appetite whatsoever in Israel to go in a massive ground operation for various reasons. International pressure, casualties in Israel. If this card will be back in a credible way on the table, this may change the Hamas's thinking.
One remark regarding that. Hamas entered that round of negotiations from its lowest point ever. I mean, we spoke about it here quite a few times. It had nothing to lose. It had no salaries to pay. The crossing points to Gaza were closed. It had no foods, no groceries, etc., etc. And it went out because, as I said, it had nothing to lose. If Hamas ends that round today, having nothing to lose, they will keep on fighting. So in a strange, bizarre way, from the Israeli point of view, wanting to finish that operation, Hamas has to get something in hand. Not everything, but something to be able to fulfill its ambitions and mainly to come to the streets of Gaza and say, it was worth the price.
This is what they've achieved. Well, we'll definitely touch on that topic more later in our program here. For now, we go to our correspondent, Eli Ochenberg, who's standing by outside of the Gaza Strip here now. Eli, I understand that some air raid sirens have sounded in the area around you here now. Can you tell us what's going on down there where you are now?
Well, David, as we all know, in the middle of the ceasefire, once again, the rocket fire renewed from the Gaza Strip towards different areas in southern Israel. We had 3 salvo of rockets towards southern Israel, including the large city of Beersheba. And following this shooting, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered to renew the IDF attacks in the Gaza Strip. And indeed, in the last couple of hours that we've been here, David, we could have seen the IDF activity all across the Gaza Strip. Now it's dark, so we cannot see the leftovers, the remains of these attacks, but they did happen. And I've been talking to the residents here near the Gaza-Israel border, David, and once again they had to send away the little children. Once again they had to be in the state of mind of the missile threat, and obviously they're not satisfied. They're very upset that this is once again the situation, but the entire area is reheating and it's very uncertain what will happen in the next couple of hours. As for now, it's been quiet for the last hour or so, but again, IDF activity in the Gaza Strip and salvo of rockets towards Israel, David.
Eli Ochenberg, our correspondent down by the border with the Gaza Strip. Thank you for that report. Back in the studio now, I understand in the last moments here, a rocket did land outside of Ashdod, the Israeli city there. Shooting at Beersheba today, shooting in Ashdod, these are relatively long range. Is this Hamas?
The stakes are very high. I mean, I take you back to the previous collapse of the ceasefire. When was that? 10 days ago, about Friday. Hamas started by shooting at the areas nearing Gaza, where Eli Ochenberg stands now. I mean, within the range of 4, 8, 10 kilometers from Gaza, reaching Sderot to the top. The industrial area of Ashkelon, to the south of Ashkelon, not even Ashkelon itself. If you want, talking to Israel, signing to Israel, signaling to Israel that we want to go back to fighting, but we don't want to break the rules. Today they started, as you well pointed out, with Beersheba, then with Ashdod right now. Now, I don't know to analyze the fact that they shot outside of Beersheba and outside of Ashdod. It might be, again, a signal. But if that's the way they play the games now, we start from the flames being at a very high level, which means Tel Aviv, the airport, Haifa, Jerusalem comes next, and Israel has to retaliate at the same level, which means if the fire doesn't stop by midnight, if we don't hear a renewal of the ceasefire, an Egyptian announcement regarding that, the fighting within the next hours or the next days will start from a very high level. And as you well know, high level takes casualties. Casualties takes response and retaliation from both sides, which means Israel will have to be dragged back into Gaza, and that's the scenario nobody wants. Maybe again, Khaled Mashal.
Speaking of nobody wanting that scenario here, and we spoke about the Egyptians now just recently and their interest in this and their critical role involved in this process. Some have said recently that it may serve Egypt's interest, in fact, to see this conflict draw out somewhat longer, to see Hamas get further weakened, as long as the Israelis are busy doing the dirty work there in the Gaza Strip. Certainly Hamas, no ally of the Egyptian government, in fact, the opposite here. So do you believe that Egypt does have some interest in, despite trying to negotiate a ceasefire, have some side interest in seeing the conflict continue?
No, David, maybe for a very short while, but long-term interest is still to maintain their status as the leader of the Arab world. As the leader of the Arab world, they have to show, first of all, some sentiments with the Palestinians and with casualties there, and secondly, that they can deliver, that they can really bring about some settlements. So I believe this is why we will see Sisi and the Egyptians really coming down hard on Hamas. PA also, if we see Abu Mazen, also his interest is, especially in light of the discovery today about this major terror ring of Hamas to topple Abu Mazen in the West Bank. So there is a great and a strong political coalition against Hamas, which they all understand. I believe Mashal as well understands it, but it's very hard to understand his rationale. Either he's raising the stakes.
That was going to be my next question for you here. Mashal, what are you reading from his behavior now with the negotiations?
Well, it seems that he understands probably that he is the big loser. He is the big loser in Gaza. Mohammed Def and all the others despise him, that he is running in 5-star hotels and he's raising the stakes, but without having any skin on the table, as we say. Also, at the end of the day, Hamas and Abu Mazen's and Americans, Israelis' interests are to diminish the Hamas political wing as well. So this is why I think for him, either he doesn't read the picture, which I'm not sure is the case, or he is really betting the house, or he is really raising the stakes. For him, it's like do or die.
David,
do you agree with that?
Yeah, I see it slightly different. First of all, because I think we Israelis have to be less convinced when talking about Mashal and the Hamas. I think in the past 6 weeks, 43 days, we misunderstood them too many times. So, and still I'll try to get into Mashal's head. Daniel Alon is right. He sits in Qatar. He doesn't feel or hear the bombs falling on Gaza. That's A. Secondly, he's a rich person. He takes percentage from every dollar coming to Gaza. He's worth something between $3 and $4 billion personally. So he doesn't feel for what's going on in Gaza. He sits in Qatar. Life from Doha seems totally different from Bet Lahia or Bet Hanun or Dir el-Balach or any other refugee camp in Gaza. Totally different. That's on one hand. On the second hand, if there is something that's significant, which is lacking from now's negotiation, is what you spoke of with Dani Alon, it's the Egyptians' role. In the past, Egypt was considered to be a fair mediator between the sides. Israel took it to be somewhere in between us and the Palestinians took the Egyptians to be at the same position. Sometimes they were pro-Israeli a little bit, sometimes pro-Palestinians under the Morsi administration, but they were always considered to be fair, objective. Now they are totally pro-Israeli. They hate Hamas because of the Islamic Brotherhood more than Israel hates Hamas. And for Hamas, it's hard to tolerate that, to take that, to inhale that, and that's the reason Khaled Mashal, Mohammed Def, Ismail Haniyeh, they don't trust the Egyptians more than they don't trust the Israelis, and that's why it's so hard for the Egyptians to broker
to actually be an honest
and
broker.
be a mediator. That's a new picture, and I agree with Dani Alon. It's a big opportunity for the Egyptian role in the area. If they succeed, they take back their leading role. If they don't, it's a big problem, not only for them, but for us as well.
Well, speaking of some of the logistics here around the Gaza Strip, the Kerem Shalom border crossing, it's the main gateway between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and it's used to transfer materials and humanitarian goods. Well, even in times of war, the crossing continues to operate, though the workers there face many threats. Well, I-24 News correspondent Michal Livon was there this week.
Considered an inseparable part of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship, the Kerem Shalom crossing is the pathway for humanitarian supplies into Gaza. It operates 5 days a week, transferring thousands of tons of supplies into the Strip each month.
The Kerem Shalom crossing is a terminal which provides for the people in Gaza. Gas, fuel, and the other commodities pass through daily, depending on their needs.
Palestinians from Gaza work with Israelis at Kerem Shalom on a daily basis. For Ami, the manager of the crossing and a former resident of Gush Katif, the Jewish settlement bloc evacuated from Gaza in 2005, this cooperation is not new.
Trust is not the basis of our mutual work. The opposite is the case. Suspicion is the basis of our work together, and we don't hide this. We are suspicious of one another, and yet we must work together.
But the nature of supplies changed over the course of Operation Protective Edge, sometimes due to personal needs, in other cases a result of ongoing security infringements.
We were able to recognize very specific pipes delivered to the Palestinian Authority, pipes that were used to create tunnel openings. There is nothing more frustrating than this. What we saw in practice is that there is no ability to control what happens to the supplies once they cross over. And these supplies became tunnels used against the State of Israel.
During Operation Protective Edge, mortar shells fired directly at the Kerem Shalom crossing scored direct hits, causing damage to the terminal. Despite this, the flow of supplies to the strip continued. So as you can see, the Kerem Shalom crossing continues to operate also during this ceasefire, as it did throughout the operation. Now, meanwhile, the citizens of the south, however, are counting down their hours until the end of the ceasefire, planning once again to sleep within their shelters tonight.
Well, now we've discussed the positions at the table here, at the negotiating table, and that Hamas essentially has nothing to lose in the situation, perhaps even motivating them to launch this war in the first place. Do you agree with that, that truly, despite their desperate position, that they have nothing to lose? I mean, certainly there are lives at stake, there's some infrastructure that exists in the Gaza Strip, and obviously people in power that want to maintain their position. So is it accurate to say that they have nothing to lose?
No, because at the end of the day, if Israel went full force, it could be existential for Hamas. Israel can take the entire Gaza Strip, can kill the entire leadership of Hamas, including this Mohammed Def, and really deal them a blow that they would not recover for many, many years. But their bet is that Israel is not willing to do that. Only if they understood that it could be an existential threat for them will they acquiesce, will they be more amenable to an agreement. And really, they are in the lowest point. Yoav was right, you know. They are really politically, militarily, economically.
At a point where they're weakened, absolutely.
Exactly. So the only thing that they have to lose is their lives as a living organization.
Well, thank you very much for your time here, Mr. Denny Aylon and Yoav Limor. Thank you as always. And don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break. The ceasefire collapses as several missiles are fired from Gaza, leading the Israeli Air Force to bomb targets in the Strip and Prime Minister Netanyahu to recall Israeli negotiators from Cairo. Iraqi government forces launch an operation to retake Tikrit from Islamic State militants a day after the Mosul Dam is recaptured by Kurdish fighters. And protesters and police clash overnight in Ferguson, Missouri, as tensions sparked by the police killing of an unarmed African-American teenager enter their 10th day. Now, Iraqi government forces launched an operation to retake Tikrit from Islamic State fighters just a day after Mosul Dam was recaptured by Kurdish forces. Well, meanwhile, Islamic State extremists have warned the United States that the group will attack Americans, quote unquote, in any place if U.S. airstrikes continue. Well, I-24 News correspondent Ayman Siksek has the story.
Just one day after President Barack Obama declared a tactical victory in reclaiming the Mosul Dam, Islamic State militants are threatening to launch terrorist attacks on American soil in revenge. In a message posted by the terrorist group on a social media website, the militants tell the Americans, "We will drown all of you in blood." On Monday, Kurdish ground forces managed to push back IS combatants from the strategic dam, aided by numerous strikes by the U.S. Air Force.
U.S.
airstrikes have helped us a lot. The U.S. does not strike residential or urban areas, bridges, roads, or villages, so the terrorists change their tactics. We must change our tactics too, and we plan to hit them hard.
The U.S. military involvement in Iraq has encouraged unlikely allies to join the fight against the Islamic State. Hundreds of guerrillas linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, have joined the Kurdish offensive against the insurgents under U.S. air cover. But the U.S. had previously declared the PKK a terrorist organization. Following these developments, the U.S. made clear its policy for the region.
We will continue to pursue a long-term strategy to turn the tide against ISIL by supporting the new Iraqi government and working with key partners in the region and beyond.
But as the fight against the extreme Sunni group continues to produce unlikely fellowships for the U.S., Kurdish residents are slowly returning to the towns liberated from the Islamic State. The question now becomes whether unity among divergent forces is the only remaining hope for Iraq.
Well, now we're joined by Hermione G. live from Erbil in the Kurdish region in northern Iraq. Well, thank you for joining us here.
Thank you.
Well, I have to ask you now, with the advance of Kurdish and other Iraqi forces, especially around the Mosul Dam, very strategic area there, is there an air of optimism where you are?
There's definitely an air of optimism with regard to the military operation. I think people are expecting things to improve, to keep improving and to improve fairly rapidly. And there's definitely a sense of relief that the Peshmerga have been able to fight back, because when they were first defeated, when they first suffered a major defeat a couple of weeks ago, people were very, very shocked, because psychologically they have a lot invested in the Peshmerga, both as a sort of symbol of Kurdistan and also, simply as a force that they trust can keep it safe. So for that reason, there is an air of optimism about that. However, everybody is confronted on a daily basis with the destruction that the Iraqis have managed to wreak already, mostly in terms of displaced people. In that sense, nobody's happy. I mean, it's still very, very desperate. The situation here is still very desperate for those people who have been displaced.
Well, how strong, as far as you can tell now, how strong is the presence of the Islamic State forces around the area where you are in northern Iraq?
In terms of numbers, it's very hard to tell because the militants sort of cross back and forth from Syria into Iraq and so forth and return. I'm hearing several thousands. Less than 10,000 seems to be the guess, but depending on where and when, anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000, something like that. In terms of the areas that they have huge parts of the Iraqi-Syrian border. They have and significant parts of sort of the northwest of Iraq, particularly between Mosul and the Syrian border. But then they're spotted, they're spotted around the area as close as 30 miles from Erbil. So
Thank you.
They still have a fairly strong presence.
Thank you very much for your time here, Hermione G, and take care of yourself out there. Well, moving on elsewhere in the region now, a story connected to Syria, as the U.S. has now declared that chemical weapons, all the chemical weapons that Syria declared, have now been destroyed, according to the White House. Well, this comes around 12 months after regime forces in Syria deployed sarin gas against a Damascus suburb. Here's more from I-24 News reporter Shai Ben-Ari.
A rare glimmer of positivity is emerging from a region which has been generating mainly negative headlines. The White House announced Monday the destruction of all Syria's declared chemical weapons had been completed. Nearly half of the Assad regime's 1,300-ton stockpile of chemical agents was destroyed aboard the Cape Ray, a specially equipped American military vessel. The rest of the materials were destroyed at Finnish, British, and German facilities. The announcement comes a year after the Assad regime used sarin gas in an attack on residents of a Damascus suburb, killing more than 1,000 as the Syrian civil war reached new levels of cruelty. Though U.S. President Barack Obama refrained from striking against the Assad regime in the wake of the attack, despite declaring that the use of chemical weapons would constitute a red line, a rare instance of Russian-American cooperation led Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to willingly give up his chemical arsenal.
If properly implemented, this agreement could end the threat these weapons pose not only to the Syrian people, but to the world.
The announcement represents a rare foreign policy achievement for the Obama administration, even as many have been sharpening their criticism of the White House's handling of a number of recent crises in the Middle East, including the Gaza conflict and the situation in Iraq, among others. Indeed, a Syrian human rights group announced Tuesday that over 6,000 new fighters had joined the ranks of the Islamic State in Syria over the past month alone, underlining the severity of this regional crisis. Considering the chaos rampant in Syria and neighboring countries, the absence of chemical weapons in the region, at least, is something to be thankful for.
Now we move to a situation we've been following closely in the United States. Rioting and looting continue in Ferguson, Missouri, as the police officer who fired the fatal shots at Michael Brown admits in his first account of the events to shooting the African-American teenager in the head right after he was attacked by Brown. Well, I-24 News correspondent Shahar Peled has the story.
It's 10 days since the fatal shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, and the storm it generated seems far from over.
Anyone who has been at these protests understands that there is a dangerous dynamic in the night. It allows a small number of violent agitators to hide in the crowd and then attempt to create chaos.
Demonstrations, mostly peaceful but with spasms of violence by smaller groups, have flared in the past couple of days, resulting in the deployment of National Guard troops who moved into the St. Louis suburb to help quell the rioting and looting. American President Barack Obama urged restraint on the part of both law enforcement and protesters.
While I understand the passions and the anger that arise over the death of Michael Brown, giving into that anger by looting or carrying guns and even attacking the police only serves to raise tensions and stir chaos.
The officer who fired the fatal shots, Darren Wilson, has so far said nothing publicly about the incident, but for the first time gave his version of the events to a friend. Wilson admits that he shot 18-year-old Michael Brown in the head, as confirmed by the autopsy report, but adds that Brown initiated the assault by striking Wilson in the face, leading to a struggle for Wilson's gun, which resulted in a shot being fired in the police vehicle. Brown reportedly moved threateningly towards Wilson even after being shot, and continued so until suffering the mortal wound to the head. Meanwhile, residents of the Missouri town continue to hold rallies in protest of the shooting, as the scenes of sorrow and violence become a daily sight in the Ferguson landscape.
And now we take a look at the economy. And joining me is Dr. Alex Coleman, value creation expert for the Academic College of Tel Aviv, University of Tel Aviv in Jaffa. Well, thank you for joining us. Frequent guest of ours. Always enjoy having you with us. Today we're talking about Detroit for a moment here. Some interesting real estate developments out there. What's happening?
Well, you can buy a house for $1 in Detroit.
$1.
$1, right. It's not 99 cents, but it's not far from that. And the reason is not
Is that a good deal? I have to ask right
It's
right
an
off.
awful.
Okay.
Don't buy an
right.
airline ticket to Detroit, because the problem, I think this is symptomatic of the tragedy of the American economy. Because the U.S. is so vast, many cities are built around an industry. And when this industry collapses, they run into trouble. So for instance, Detroit, it was built around the automobile industry. General Motors went bankrupt. I mean, it still exists, but it's doing really tough.
Bailout didn't exactly work for many
exactly.
of those companies. Yes.
It was and they had all these recalls and accidents, etc. Chrysler was acquired by Fiat, so it's also not doing that well. And the tragedy is that you have this awful domino effect, because when the company goes bankrupt or is in trouble, you have layoff. So many people lose their jobs. Normally, if I were to lose my job, I would still have value in my home. But because everybody's leaving Detroit, nobody would buy the house. So your only asset, the asset you paid your mortgage throughout your life, is worth nothing. So people just flee, they abandon their houses, and now the community starts to collapse because the community does not raise enough taxes, because the automobile manufacturers do not make money, people do not make money. So you don't have money for cops. So people just loot your house, and so you don't have ambulances.
We witnessed this phenomenon of entire neighborhoods emptied out across Detroit now.
Exactly.
Ghost towns, essentially.
Ghost towns, exactly. And these are horrific ghost towns. And I think this is an awful example of the cruelty of extreme capitalism. Because in Europe, and actually in the US during the New Deal, when there was the Great Depression during the 30s, in the beginning, the assumption was people should survive. But then the government understood that it had deep pockets, it could print money, and it could give people some money, which would accelerate the economy. But what's happening here is that the only thing is you have those quantitative easings where the interest rate goes down. Money is very available to the financial institutions, but to the individual, There's no help. There are no jobs. And as a result, you have these ghost towns, and people are devastated. I mean, even if you have a job, you're left in a neighborhood that's vacant, that's looted.
And now they're practically giving homes away in some of these neighborhoods.
Exactly. Just to get rid of them, to get people to pay taxes for them, etc.
Is there a chance that this can succeed, this tactic? In other words, will this attract buyers who maybe foresee a brighter future for Detroit?
I would assume it would succeed in the longer term, in the sense that, first of all, Detroit went bankrupt. I mean, that's a big problem when a municipality can. But in the long term, other industries would find very lucrative, very cheap real estate and probably would move in. But in between, it's going to be very painful.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Alex Coleman, for your insight here.
Thank you.
And moving to a more grim topic now, more than 1,200 people have died from Ebola in West Africa, the World Health Organization reported, but it cited quote-unquote encouraging signs from Nigeria and Guinea, and that positive action can rein in the deadly disease. Well, Eli Ochenberg has more.
The World Health Organization published disturbing data Tuesday on the scale of the Ebola virus. In only 3 days, 84 people were killed by the virus, bringing the global death toll to 1,229 people. The number of confirmed infections jumped by 113 over the same period, and the total number of cases now stands at 2,240, according to the UN Health Agency. The epidemic, which has hit 4 West African nations since it broke out in Guinea at the start of the year, is by far the deadliest since Ebola was discovered 4 decades ago in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. In Sierra Leone, where 38 new infections and 17 fatalities were recorded, raising the total case count to 848 and its death toll to 365, the local residents are terrified.
I don't have no rain boots, no jackets, you see? So I'm afraid, and this is the virus, you have a transparent, when you have a contact with someone who have it will contact to you back.
In Liberia, people who were being screened for Ebola when they fled a health center during looting have returned themselves into a hospital. The patients ran when an Ebola holding facility was ransacked in Liberia's capital on Saturday night, raising fears that the deadly virus might spread into the densely populated slums surrounding it. Liberian Information Minister Louis Brown said Tuesday that the last 17 people who were missing have now turned themselves into a treatment center at a major hospital in the capital. As for now, even though the best minds in the world are trying to figure out how to control the spreading of the virus, there is no cure, no established drug therapy, and no vaccine to protect victims against the lethal fever which the virus causes. Until then, the African citizens will remain in fear from the highly contagious assassin.
And now the conflict in Ukraine continues to rage. Just 1 day after a refugee convoy was hit by rocket fire, resulting in at least 15 casualties. The tension now between Ukraine and its Russian neighbor is still very high. Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin intends to meet his Ukrainian counterpart, Petro Poroshenko, next week in a last effort to avoid further escalation. Well, I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira has more.
The crisis in Ukraine continues to occupy the busy minds of officials in Kiev and Moscow. Ukrainian authorities reported that 15 bodies were identified from Monday's shelling in Luhansk against a convoy carrying refugees. Both sides, the Ukrainian forces and the rebels, blame each other on the incident. Ukraine's foreign minister accused the Russians of not taking responsibility for the violent incidents that originated in Russian territories and the supply of weapons to the pro-Moscow separatists.
Russia is not ready to recognize the facts of deliveries of heavy weapons and mercenaries to Ukraine, as well as the facts of shooting over Ukrainian territory.
In the meantime, the controversy surrounding the Russian humanitarian aid convoy continues as well. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said Tuesday that the violent activities around the Russian-Ukrainian border were intensified over the past week.
We have seen helicopters flying around and above the border crossing points, and we have also noticed that there was an increase in traffic in vehicles in the vicinity.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to meet his Ukrainian counterpart next week in Belarus to discuss ways to stabilize the predicament. But as fighting continues, and the suspicion still looms large. A ceasefire in the eastern Ukraine looks unlikely.
Well, now, the Save a Child's Heart NGO has performed thousands of operations on children from various parts of the world. One of the most recent was on a toddler from a country near Israel who had no hope of treatment where he lived. Well, here's more in the following report by Jaffa Port.
Save a Child's Heart. This was the title chosen by an Israeli human rights NGO aimed at minors with heart conditions. The group works in cooperation with the Wolfson Medical Center in Holon and brings together physicians to treat children from various parts of the world.
Many of the children that we bring to Wolfson Medical Center to undergo life-saving heart surgery come from countries that Israel have no formal relationship with. We manage to receive permits and visas and bring these children to Israel with the assistance and the cooperation of officials in Israel.
The NGO provides medical care to children from Palestine to Tanzania and Syria, among other countries. But one of the most standout cases was that of Wissam, an Iraqi child of the Yazidi sect who suffers from a genetic deformation of the heart. He was flown to Israel, countless miles away from the Islamic State terror storming through their home country, for treatment by Save a Child's Heart.
I want to thank Save a Child's Heart for all its help in treating my son, and the Israeli government for allowing us the necessary permits to come here so he can receive his treatment.
Wissam's family had nearly lost hope of being able to treat his condition until human rights associations allowed them to leave Iraq for his treatment. The operation was a great success.
He used to suffer from a severe deformation, and I say used to because he doesn't suffer from it any longer. And I think God loves this child because he was able to leave Iraq in this terrible time and come here. Fortunately, we were able to help him.
His medical condition is now greatly improved. His operation was a success, and his health is improving consistently.
Wissam is only one of many children treated by the doctors of Save a Child's Heart, who are able to provide treatment unavailable or scarce in many countries around the world.
And now we take a look at the latest from the world of culture. Joining me in the studio now is culture correspondent Jaffa Port. Take a look at the latest in culture again. What do you have for us?
Hi, good evening, David. Well, let's start with Leonard Cohen, which is great news. Earlier today, this morning, in fact, he surprisingly released a new song. It's called Almost Like the Blues, and he released it straight to YouTube. Of course, it became viral very quickly and very popular in social media. And what's surprising about this is that nobody knew he was going to release a new song. It's been 2 years since his last album.
He's he's older now, right? Not as active. I know he's still performing.
Absolutely correct. Next month, his newest album, Popular Problems, will be released, and it will be released 2 days after his 80th birthday. Wow. And it's amazing to see such a performer continuing to present his art and continue to write songs and sing them. It's amazing, and fans are absolutely excited about this, and it's especially impressive after a 15-year break since 2008. He's on a roll. This is his second album, and fans are very excited. We're moving on to actor Tom Hanks, who is not only an actor, is also a director, a producer, a screenwriter, and now an application creator. His new app was first place in the Apple Store. It probably helps being Tom Hanks. It's called the Hanks Writer, and it actually simulates a typewriter machine. Tom Hanks is known for his love to these machines. He has
He's not the only one. A lot of the old school writers
It's true. It's very nostalgic.
It's different than a computer. People say the computer is an editing tool, and the typewriter is a writing tool.
And people love to collect them. So does Tom Hanks. And so he created this app. You can see that you can write texts and messages on your smartphone, on your tablet, like on a typewriting machine. And people loved it. #1 in the Apple App Store.
What's Tom Hanks' connection to to this? Is there any?
No, only
Except his
personal
name.
love to the personal love to the machine, and apparently he helped make it happen, bring to life, and he gave it his name. So the Hanks
Promotion,
writer,
absolutely,
is
huge.
probably great promotion. And finally, Pixar Studios films. They are very much known for their development of new films and the changes they bring to the films in last minute. Now we know of their new development undergoing film. It's called The Good Dinosaur. Last year they already replaced its director, and now the most exciting news is that John Lithgow, the actor who will give his voice as part of the cast, he gave an interview, and he said yesterday in this interview that he will have to re-record his entire part because, quote, they have now dismantled it and completely reimagined it, and it is a fantastic new story. Pixar are known for their attempt to bring to perfection their films. This is something they've already done back in Ratatouille and Toy Story, which are beloved films.
Absolutely.
And yet they're doing it again. They have been going under some criticism in the past couple of years of doing more and more sequels and prequels to their films. They're trying to stick to original stories and trying to bring them once again to perfection.
This is their next big
venture. Yes,
well,
absolutely.
Great, Jaffa Port, thank you for joining us as always.
Thank you very much.
And now something else to report to you about, the Ice Bucket Challenge. Well, it's becoming a worldwide phenomenon. Well, people are dared to pour a bucket of ice water on their head and challenge 3 others to do the same or donate money to ALS research, which is the main cause behind the phenomenon. Well, celebrities, politicians, and the man in the street have all accepted the dare. And I-24 News CEO Frank Malul did this afternoon at the I-24 News headquarters in the Jaffa Port. We also challenged 3 others to do the same. Take a look.
Daniel, we are okay? Go. Okay, bye-bye.
The I-24 News teams have nominated me for the Ice Bucket Challenge. I accept. According to the rules, I must nominate 3 others to take the ice bucket. So I nominate Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Mahmoud Abbas, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Gentlemen, I challenge you to take the ice bucket like I'm doing, and also to donate money to charity. I confirm, it's very cold. Thank you.
Well, absolutely entertaining to see that, to say the least. Well, now we move on, take a look at sports. And we're joined by our sports correspondent, Meirav Savir, among other things that you do for us around here. Meirav,
one of the many.
What have you got for us today?
Starting off with FC Barcelona, they played a friendly yesterday against a Mexican team, and they won 6-0. Now they're except for the 6-0, they took it easy. Absolutely, they took it easy on them. There are 2 storylines to this big game. One of them, Neymar, coming back from that vertebrae injury that he got during the World Cup. First time back, his first game that he played back, and he actually scored 2 goals before halftime and assisted a Messi goal. That's probably one of the biggest stories. The other
that's
story...
what Brazil was missing.
That's what Brazil was missing, and that's what brought up that German blitzkrieg in that game that we all so much enjoyed over here. The other storyline, Luis Suarez, the 4-month ban was upheld, but they did go easy on him a little bit, saying, you know what, you can practice and you can play in the friendlies.
Just to remind our viewers, for the biting incident.
Yes, the biting incident. All this goes back to the World Cup. The biting incident during the World Cup, he got banned, longest ban ever given out during the World Cup. He came in the 75th minute, so it took a while for the Barcelona fans to actually see their new star, but he came in the 75th minute. People cheered at the beginning when they announced him. So even though they're not going to actually see him play during an actual relevant game until the end of October. So it's kind of a teaser for them, if we can call it that.
Let's move to the NBA. I know there's been some action there. What's going on?
Absolutely. So season isn't even close to being started yet, but the LA Clippers already are starting a whole brand new page. Steve Ballmer was introduced as the new CEO yesterday during a fan fest. This guy is a completely different thing than what they had with Donald Sterling. You could see it. He came into the fan fest to Eminem's Lose Yourself, high-fiving fans, hugging players, absolutely incredible. And he had a couple messages for fans. The first one being, I love basketball. The second one being I love LA, because some people were a little nervous that he's going to take the team to Seattle. That's what he had when he tried to buy the Sacramento Kings. They didn't want him to move him. And he did have a third message, and we do have a part of what he told fans if you want to take a listen to it.
Hardcore. We're going to get better every day. We're going to be tenacious. Something knocks us down. We're going to get back up, and we're going to keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. Did you watch these guys? That was hardcore. Hardcore, baby.
Well, certainly bringing some new energy into the situation.
Any energy. It seemed like Donald Sterling never wanted anything to do with the media until his name broke out with that whole scandal. And this is a guy who's embracing it and loves it. If you saw the players, I don't think they even knew what to do with how
seemed a little surprised sitting up there, right?
It's a whole new ballgame for them. And he did tell fans he is expecting them to win lots and lots of champions. In his first debut standing on that stage, he's already promising things. It's giving me flashbacks to LeBron with not one, not two, not three. So he's looking way ahead to win championships with the Clippers. And you know what? He's got a team with players that can do it.
Got a chance.
CP3, Blake Griffin. He's got a coach that can do it. So who knows?
Sevilla, great to have you as always. And again, we'll be right back after the break. Don't go anywhere.